Columbus did not discover anything. The Vikings arrived in North America 500 years before Columbus did. Manly P. Hall, the most prolific Masonic author of all time, wrote a compact book in 1944 entitled The Secret Destiny of America. It confirms that the Old World knew about the New World for thousands of years. Columbus sailed to the West because his family and those who paid for his expedition were steeped in Rosicrucianism and wished to lay the foundation of a new world order. One only has to look at the cipher used in his signature for proof of this claim. Much of the occult knowledge of the Knights Templar is carved in stone in Scotland's Rosslyn Chapel. The carvings that line the inner frame above this window are of maize or of Indian corn that grew only in the New World. How could this be if the construction of the Rosslyn Chapel began in 1446 or 46 years before Columbus sailed to the West? For the answer to this question, we should look at the sails on the ships used by Columbus. They were adorned with the logo of the Knights Templar. From before the time of Columbus until today, America has always had a special place in the plans of the New World Order. The Illuminati in Europe saw the rare positive outcome of the American Revolution and sought to subvert it through the Columbian Lodge of the Order of the Illuminati, established in New York in 1785. Agents of the Illuminati worked to start a new revolution in America so that America would resemble France without the Napoleonic influence. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton established the first privately owned central bank in the United States with $10 million on a 20-year charter. This is contrary to the United States Constitution, which Hamilton signed. When the charter expired, the head of this private group was revealed. None other than Nathan Rothschild in England said, "Either the application for the renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself in a most disastrous war." The United States repelled the British on American soil within 1 year of Nathan Rothschild's pronouncement during the War of 1812. Fortunately for America, Britain was tied up fighting Napoleon in Europe and couldn't send enough troops to reclaim America. While America won a military victory, its financial back was broken. The War of 1812 forced the rechartering of the private bank of the United States. Thanks to the war and inflation, the debt owed to the bank exploded to $127 million. Andrew Jackson vetoed the bank in 1832. In 1835, President Jackson distributed a $35 million surplus. This was the only time in American history that the United States had balanced its books. The Rothschilds had their sights set on reclaiming America. A divide and conquer strategy would be used by creating a conflict between the North and the South. The North was to be a British colony annexed to Canada under the control of Lionel Rothschild. The South was to be a French colony given to Napoleon III of France under the control of James Rothschild. Lincoln's main problem shifted from slavery, which he outlawed, to how he was going to pay for the defense of America against the international bankers who were destroying it. Lincoln came up with a brilliant solution called the greenback. The government would print its own interest-free currency that would later be redeemable in gold. The bankers wouldn't stand for this. On April 14, 1865, 5 days after the South surrendered, Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. Booth was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. The monarchies of Europe, led by the British royal family, had been involved in the occult for centuries through the sponsorship of clairvoyance. The British royal family is deeply Masonic. The Queen's cousin, the Duke of Kent, is British Freemasonry's Grand Master. There is even a Freemasonic lodge in Buckingham Palace. Though the current Queen says that she is not amused at this, she and her predecessors were often Masonic. It is a fact that much of the European nobility goes back to various houses, especially in England and France, which link the lines of the kings of England and the kings of Jerusalem. Fiction occurs when this link is used to create a mythology which states that the British people, led by their monarch, are one of the lost tribes of Israel. British Israel Freemasons also believe that since America was descendant from Britain, Americans who are of British Masonic descent are also one of the lost tribes of Israel. On the back of the US $1 bill, there exists a Star of David, hidden in plain sight. The British royal family is more German than it is English. Queen Victoria was married to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Under pressure from anti-German sentiment created during World War I, King George V changed his family name to Windsor. When Princess Elizabeth wanted to marry Prince Philip of the House of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg, she faced the same problem that King George did. Prince Philip renounced his titles and adopted the surname of Mountbatten. All four of Prince Philip's sisters married into the German nobility, which embraced Nazi philosophy. Remember that Adam Weishaupt wrote more material on the Illuminati under the sponsorship of Duke Ernst II of Saxe-Coburg-Altenburg. Because Prince Albert was great-grandson of Duke Ernst II and consort to Queen Victoria, the British royal family are direct descendants of Ernst II. Since Duke Ernst II became a member of the Illuminati in 1783, it is not hard to see that the teachings of Adam Weishaupt are being used by the British royal family today. The British monarchy was involved in 2 wars with China over opium. From about the mid-17th century onwards, Europe had a huge trade deficit with China. Europe wanted Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain, but China did not want as much of what Europe had to offer. This trade deficit problem was made worse by the fact that Chinese emperors demanded to be paid in silver and gold coin. The problem was solved when British traders began importing opium into China from India. Large areas of China became addicted to opium. The addiction was so intense that in many areas of China, opium was currency. The conflict between the Chinese emperors and British traders grew so bad that Queen Victoria sent in the British army to fight the Chinese army over opium in 1839 to 1842 and again in 1846 to 1860. When you are told that the British royal family's wealth is based on taxation, don't believe it. It could be argued that the British East India Company occupied India on behalf of the British Crown and its traders. Afghanistan is occupied today by coalition forces. In 2007, 93% of the world's opium production came from Afghanistan. The 2006 Afghan opium harvest was also valued at $3 billion. The Round Table groups are the most influential and interconnected secret societies in the Western world. While Cecil Rhodes did not start any of these groups, he was instrumental in ensuring that they worked together toward a common goal. In 1966, Georgetown University history professor Carroll Quigley defined this goal in a massive work entitled Tragedy and Hope. One of the members of the Round Table groups sponsored Carroll Quigley, who was given access to their secret records to produce what the group thought would be an internal publication.
As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carroll Quigley, who said to us that America was the greatest nation in history because our people had always believed in 2 things: that tomorrow can be better than today, and that every one of us has a personal moral responsibility to make it so.
Soon after Adam Weishaupt died, Italian patriot Giuseppe Mazzini was appointed to be the head of the Illuminati in 1834. Mazzini became a 33rd degree Mason while attending Genoa University. The most important thing about Mazzini is that he formalized the Mafia. The name Mafia is an acronym which stands for Mazzini Autofizia Ferti Incendi and Everlameni, or Mazzini authorizes thefts, fires, and poisonings. With the wave of Italian immigration to America starting in the 1890s, the practices of the Mafia merged with the Illuminati of America. Next to Adam Weishaupt, Albert Pike is the most influential Freemason in history. Pike was asked by American Freemasons to reform its rituals. He did so in a Masonic handbook entitled Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Rite of Freemasonry, published in 1871. The Knights of the Golden Circle, or KGC, was a Masonic organization dedicated to establishing a golden circle of territories between Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and the southern states, which would officially sanction slavery. Albert Pike was associated with the KGC and created several spin-off groups from it, including the Ku Klux Klan. While he was Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Albert Pike created his own office of Chief Justice of the KKK. This is also borne out at the location of his statue, which is in Judiciary Square in Washington, D.C. Albert Pike is responsible for inflaming racial tensions that were the official cause of the U.S. Civil War. Now you can understand how the American Civil War was really about who would control the money supply of the United States, and that slavery was a secondary issue in this conflict. William Huntington Russell was one of the more prominent merchants involved in the Chinese opium trade. Born in America, Russell did what most wealthy businessmen did during the Industrial Revolution: protect his assets from taxation by establishing a tax-free foundation. The tax-free foundation that Russell and Company established based on opium revenue was the Russell Trust. The key institution of indoctrination that Russell Trust established was Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones was founded at Yale University in 1832 as a Black Lodge of Freemasonry. The odds that both presidential candidates would happen to be members of Skull and Bones is approximately 1 in 750,000. 3 generations of the Bush family have been members of Skull and Bones. George W. Bush, his father George H.W. Bush, and his father before him, Prescott Bush, were all members of this occult secret society. It has been alleged by members of Skull and Bones that it was Prescott Bush who stole the skull and bones of Indian Chief Geronimo and placed it in the tomb as a source of spiritual power. George W. Bush never apologized for his activities in Skull and Bones. One of the first things he did as president was appoint many of his fellow bonesmen to positions of power. Georg Hegel was a German philosopher who came up with a basic system for achieving the goals of the Illuminati called the Hegelian dialectic. This system is based on 3 steps. In step 1, a rogue government will create the problem that harms or even kills its own citizens. This deception is known as a false flag attack. In step 2, a rogue government will control the reaction to the problem which it created by typically blaming it on an enemy or some aspect of its own society over which it seeks more control. This is why the term false flag attack is so named. In step 3, a rogue government will offer the solution to the problem which it created. This solution is typically a war or a system of regulations. The solution would usually not be accepted by the public had the rogue government not created the crisis and controlled the reaction to it in the first place. A government which seeks increasing control can keep pushing society to accept its agenda by following a series of problems, reactions, and solutions which it planned all along. The significance of the Hegelian dialectic is not how evil it is, but rather how often governments choose to follow it. There has not been a major war in the 20th and 21st centuries that does not follow the Hegelian dialectic. Though his family converted to Christianity, Karl Marx became a Satanist during his university years. In a poem entitled Pale Maiden, Marx wrote, "Thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell." Over time, Marx became a 32nd degree Mason. Karl Marx met up with German philosopher Friedrich Engels. Engels joined a revolutionary group 10 years earlier, founded by Giuseppe Mazzini. It was Engels who would feed Karl Marx physically and intellectually for life. Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848 based on a draft from Engels. The manifesto was commissioned by the Communist League in London, whose history can be traced back to the Jacobin Club and the Illuminati. The foundations of communism are identical to the goals of the Illuminati. Karl Marx was always looking for money. He found it when Nathan Rothschild gave Marx several £1,000s to finance the cause of socialism through the Hegelian dialectic. Marx wrote Das Kapital in 1867, which became known as the Bible of the working class. While his Bible called for the working class to rise up and overthrow the financial bourgeoisie, Marx evidently did not practice what he preached. In an 1864 letter to his uncle, Marx announced that he made £400 on the stock exchange. Nikolai Lenin picked up where Karl Marx left off. Lenin admired Mikhail Bakunin, who wrote, "The evil one is the satanic revolt against divine authority. Satan, the eternal rebel, the first free thinker, and the emancipator of worlds." While attending university, Lenin became a Mason. Stopped by Andrew Jackson and delayed by Abraham Lincoln, the international bankers finally seized control of the financial system of the United States. On December 23, 1913, the Federal Reserve Act passed through Congress when most congressmen were home for Christmas. President Wilson promised to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign contributions. This unconstitutional act allowed a private group of international bankers to print pieces of paper as money which would be loaned out to the government at interest. Leading directly or indirectly through their agents, the most prominent members of this group were J.P. Morgan, J.D. Rockefeller, Jacob Schiff, and Max and Paul Warburg. Every member of this group was connected in different ways to the Rothschilds. The international bankers wasted little time in doing what they do best: finance wars. The bankers of Europe and America found a way to ignite the growing tension between Germany and the Anglo-American establishment for the economic and cultural dominance of Europe. Most people know that the flashpoint of World War I along the Western Front was the torpedoing of the Lusitania on May 7, 1915. What most people don't know is how the operations of the Lusitania were engineered to provoke this war. British intelligence broke the German war code in December 1914. This meant that the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, knew where every German U-boat was in the English Channel. The Lusitania slowed to await the arrival of its military escort through the channel. Churchill ordered the escort to return to port. The Lusitania was crawling alone through a war zone. A private letter from Churchill removes any doubt as to whether he intended for the Lusitania to be sunk. Roughly 1,200 people lost their lives in an engineered event designed to start a war. The Germans claimed that the Lusitania was carrying arms from America to be used by Britain against Germany. 93 years later, this claim has been proven to be true. The English-speaking press, controlled by the CFR in America and the Rothschild-owned news services in Europe, published the claim that the barbaric Germans had attacked an unarmed passenger ship. This ignores the fact that the German government placed warnings in New York newspapers reminding passengers that the ship would be sailing into a war zone. The best example of how the Illuminati bankers funded both sides of World War I was given through Max and Paul Warburg. Paul Warburg's firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company was in charge of Liberty Loans, which helped finance the American military. Max Warburg's firm of M.M. Warburg and Company helped finance the German military. The Rothschilds were unable to control Russia because of the Tsar until World War I, when the alliance between the European and American bankers was complete. Jacob Schiff spent $20 million in gold to finance the Russian Revolution through Leon Trotsky, who was exiled in style in New York. Of the 384 commissars that were to make up the new Russian government, 264 had come from the United States. When the ship carrying the men and materials for the revolution were seized at the port of Halifax by Canadian authorities, President Wilson secured their release by stating that if they weren't let go, the US would not enter the war. Lenin, exiled in Switzerland, promised to make peace with Germany if he overthrew Russia's temporary government. He was placed in a sealed railway car with $5 million in German gold and was sent to Russia. When the elections were held in November 1917, Lenin's communists received only 24% of the vote. Lenin had to use force in order to represent the people. The United States stepped in with enormous amounts of food and relief supplies as famine gripped Russia while Lenin took control of it. This opened the door for American industrialists and financiers like J.D. Rockefeller to build the infrastructure of Russia. The net effect was that America continued to support the communist revolution. This support was extended as power was transferred from Lenin to Stalin in spite of Stalin's ruthlessness. World War I ended according to the master plan of the 20th century Illuminati financiers. They knew that communism could only continue so long as capitalism supported it. The financiers also knew that the oppressive chains of the Treaty of Versailles would be broken by a leader who would eventually rise up from within Germany. Welcome to the first round of Problem, Reaction, and Solution. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, several captains of industry emerged in America. Andrew Carnegie made his fortune in steel production. Henry Ford excelled at making cars. John D. Rockefeller made the largest fortune in America through banking based on oil production. Many have speculated that the CFR is an acronym based on Carnegie, Ford, and Rockefeller. While this may not be the case, all three of these men have had a financial stake in the CFR, which was officially formed in New York in July 1921. Its logo features a rider on a white horse giving a Masonic salute. The Latin word in the logo means everywhere. The CFR in New York is the counterpart to the Royal Institute in London. Both groups are members of the Round Table groups. The same bankers which established the Federal Reserve in 1913 funded the CFR through dozens of tax-free foundations. If you want to catch a ride in the Anglo-American machinery of the Illuminati today, you will agree to be told what to do.
It's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
The goal of the Royal Institute and the CFR is nothing less than one world government. In 1950, CFR member James Warburg testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and said, "We shall have world government whether or not you like it, by conquest or consent." You would think that the CFR would be the talk of the American mainstream media, but the CFR dictates what will make the American news and how it will be presented to reporters in key positions who are along for the establishment ride. Following World War I, the League of Nations was the first popular attempt at creating a world government. The League was promoted as the way of providing a collective security, since an attack on any one member of the League would be considered an attack on all. The League failed as an organization, but acted as a successful stepping stone for the globalists. The League of Nations allowed the international bankers like J.D. Rockefeller to give more loans to more nations, provided the international bankers controlled the banking system of that nation. When the Bank for International Settlements was established in 1930, the Illuminati financiers gained more control of the world's money supply. This was all the more reason to start World War II. Adolf Hitler was offered as the manufactured solution to the burden imposed upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. The event Hitler created to take control of Germany was engineered through a false flag attack. We now know that Hitler had his henchmen set fire to the German parliament, known as the Reichstag, in 1933. The fire was blamed on communist agent Marinus van der Lubbe in a huge show trial. In reality, van der Lubbe was a mentally handicapped individual picked up off the streets. Hitler's mighty war machine was funded and created by Wall Street. The Treaty of Versailles induced Germany to default on its debt. The Dawes Plan replaced the treaty after 5 years and allowed links to be made between American and German industry and finance. From the mid-1920s to the late 1930s, through the Bank of International Settlements, over $135 million was loaned to the German electrical, steel, and chemical industries from Wall Street. The profits on these loans were considerable. Without the technology for extracting petroleum from the German coal fields supplied by Rockefeller-owned Standard Oil of New Jersey, the Nazi war machine would have ran out of gas. One of the funders of the Nazi war machine was Prescott Bush, father and grandfather of 2 U.S. presidents. According to files from the U.S. National Archives, Prescott Bush was a partner in Brown Brothers Harriman. This was one of the corporations used by industrialist Fritz Thyssen to move assets between America and Germany. Prescott Bush's assets in Union Banking Corporation were seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1942, after America entered the war. The Bush family fortune was built in part from funding the very enemy that would kill over 400,000 American troops.
May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable Prescott Bush, United States Senator from Connecticut.
I think we have made, just in this year, very marked and noticeable progress in connection with the Cold War. Included in that, too, should be our efforts to get at this subversion business within our own government.
The ideologies of the Nazis and the Communists were set against each other by the Illuminati financiers in a dialectical struggle. Both ideologies are flawed and use the same means to produce the same result. The Illuminati financiers chose to eliminate the Nazi movement and preserve communism for one very important reason. Hitler started to print money just like the Federal Reserve. At this point, all of Europe was tied up in war with itself. The problem and reaction stages of World War II would only be solved through America. America entered World War II based on the Pearl Harbor attack that was allowed to happen and deliberately made worse. The Japanese signals indicating the time, place, and resources to be used in the attack were remotely intercepted and sent to President Roosevelt. President Roosevelt chose not to relay the information to Pearl Harbor. America now had the excuse to attack Germany, even though Germany never attacked America. The Japanese were ready to surrender in February 1945, but 2 nuclear bombs were dropped on them after this date instead of being used in Europe. The madness of World War II accomplished several things for the Illuminati financiers. Profits could be generated by rebuilding Japan and using it to provide cheap labor to flood America with inexpensive goods. This would accelerate the long-term planned process of bringing down America, just as China is being used to help finish the job today. Communism was allowed to consume half of Europe in order to lock America and the Soviet Union in a new dialectical struggle and a new opportunity for profit. Most importantly, World War II paved the way to create the United Nations and the Nation of Israel. It must be noted that the top 4 players of World War II had ties to the occult. Hitler was deeply involved in the black arts. He joined a group focused on esoteric teachings called the Thule Society. This is where the logo for the Nazi Party came from. The occult foundation of Nazi philosophy was laid by Dietrich Eckart, not by Adolf Hitler. Joseph Stalin was involved in Freemasonry. Here we see him giving the same sign of the hidden hand, the same hand sign of Freemasons Napoleon and Solomon Rothschild. Franklin Roosevelt was a 32nd degree Mason. Winston Churchill was a member of 2 Masonic lodges, including a Druidic lodge. When you look at a photograph of the 3 main characters involved at the Yalta Conference in February 1945, keep in mind that all 3 were Freemasons. The United Nations was the second prearranged attempt at world government, offered as the solution to future conflicts like World War II. To help prevent the pivotal United States from backing out of the United Nations, as it did with the League of Nations, the UN was to be located on American soil with land graciously donated by John D. Rockefeller Jr. Through its domination of the American media, the CFR conditioned the United States to accept the increasing role of the UN in the drive for world government. Political Zionism, a tool of the Rothschilds, clearly expressed the desire to create Israel long before World War II. This is documented in the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Arthur James Balfour of the British Foreign Office announced that it was the will of His Majesty's government to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This official policy was given to the World Zionist Federation of Great Britain, headed by Lord Rothschild, over 30 years before Israel was created. James Balfour, a willing tool of the British Freemasonic crown, was awarded many Masonic royal titles for this and other services rendered. Political Zionism used and magnified the anti-Semitism of the Nazi movement to create Israel. As soon as Hitler took power in 1933, many Jews around the world boycotted German goods. The political Zionists in Palestine negotiated a secret deal with the devil. In return for the transfer of 60,000 Jews and $100 million to Palestine, political Zionists would halt the worldwide Jewish-led anti-Nazi boycott that threatened to topple the Hitler regime in its first year. Over 40 million Chinese died in a 25-year period under the dictatorship of Mao Zedong, yet all you probably know is the phrase 6 million Jews. The Holocaust of the Jews has been ground into the public consciousness by the political Zionists who used its horror to justify their goal. Theodor Herzl's dream was realized when the flag he proposed, based on the Rothschild hexagram, flew over Israel in May 1948.